Welcome back to the YouTube home of Peter Pan lore and Peter Pan facts with me, your Peter Pan hobbyist and enthusiast, using my Peter Pan hobbyist enthusiast brain and knowledge to bring you fun facts, lore and trivia, talk about the world of the Neverland, the story of Peter Pan, answer you guys' questions, and today we're continuing with the 120 years of Peter Pan costumes series. And this time we're going to look at the darker adaptations of this character. Now, for this we are only including ones that are visual medium, so I can't include any simply written novels, things like that. We're going to be including films, TV series, and a graphic novel. Now, I may well have missed a few off on this series. I have tried to compile it as best I possibly can. If there is anything you think I have missed off at the very end, chuck it in the comments down below and I will do an entire video on it next year. But for now, let's dive into 5 of the darker adaptations of Peter Pan and his costume. Before we begin, I do want to say that this video is coming to you a little bit late. It should have arrived on the 1st or 2nd of November, ready to celebrate the month of October, the dark Halloween-y month. However, I got my information mixed up and I thought that by then we would have had the brand new horror movie, Peter Pan's Nightmare Neverland. I thought I could have watched that and included it in this list, but unfortunately it is not out yet. And because it's not out yet, we can't see the full costume in all its detail. We don't know if there are any changes, anything like that. So I'm gonna have to leave that for next year. And it's probably going to get a whole video review all to itself. Yay! Something to look forward to. So for now, I have to apologise, Peter Pan's Nightmare Neverland is not in this list. So instead, let's look at the 5 dark adaptations I have found to talk about. Also at this point, before we even begin, I would like to include a content warning and a trigger warning for this video. I won't be showing you anything visually graphic or horrible, and I won't be talking about anything in too much detail, but we are talking about the darker adaptations, and I will be talking in brief about some of the plot points that they hit on. These will be including things like death, grief, loss, murder, kidnapping, SA, that kind of thing. So if you're not in the headspace to listen to any of that, this probably isn't the video for you, so go check out some of my happier ones and come back to the next video. The way I've decided to set out this video is I'm going to start at number 5, the least dark of all the dark adaptations. So I'll talk a little bit about the adaptations themselves, then we'll talk about the big bit, the Peter Pan costume, what they remind me of in other costumes over the years, what I think they've drawn on, where their inspiration came on, and just a general, what do we think of it? And then we'll work our way up and up and up and up until we get to number 1, which I believe is the darkest of the adaptations on this list. Alright then, let's start with number 5. The Royal Shakespeare Company's Wendy and Peter Pan. Now this one isn't dark because it was made to be a horror. It's not like The Woman in Black, that kind of play, anything like that. Instead it's dark because of the themes that it explores. In interviews, the playwright Ella Hickson said that after reading the first story of Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie's work, the idea was to make it Wendy's story. The quote says, "She was my protagonist, and I felt that the play would be about loss, the loss of childhood or of someone you love. Wendy seems to grow up at the very moment that she realizes Peter will always be a boy." And this is very true. As a moment, Wendy, while having always wanted to grow up, she has a real moment of clarity when she realizes just how much Peter is never going to change. In that argument they have in The Home Under the Ground, where he says to her that his feelings will be always those of a devoted son. And she has that moment of, as I said, clarity, where she realizes she wants more than that. She wants to grow up. She's always known she wants to grow up, but in this moment she sees it so clearly. She wants it now. She wants to go home. And that's what sets in motion and that's what happens. And so choosing that particular moment speaks volumes to me. While I'm not particularly keen on what they did with some aspects of the story in this version, I can definitely see why they chose to do it and why that moment was so pivotal. I also just really enjoy hearing about people who bothered to read the source material. That's incredibly important to me. So while this is at number 5, because I don't think it is the darkest of the adaptations, it definitely has a lot to it. You've got grief and loss, the death of a child, you've got illness, you've got watching someone wither away and decay, you've got despair, you've got evil and cruelty and kidnapping and murder and death and all these things, and a power imbalance and a struggle as well. It's a very interesting show. I remember watching it and having to really take off my hat of knowing this lore and understanding the story very well, because these characters have been changed quite a lot, but we're not here to talk about that in this video. I might do a full video on this show at some point. It was still very beautiful to watch, even though the characters were not the ones I know from the original lore. But let's get into what this video is actually about, and we'll talk about Peter Pan's costume. I bet there is a good picture of... No! Oh my good God. These are my tickets from when I went to see it. How are you still in the programme? Oh my God. Waterside, Stratford-upon-Avon. When did I see this? The 4th of January, 2014. Oh my God. Oh, I forgot where I was living in 2014. Oh my word. Wow. All right, so yeah. Tickets. Damn. All right. Anyway, right, we were looking for a picture of Peter Pan's costume in this. I will put one up on the screen, but I'm going to see if I can find one here for you now as well. He is not in that one. That one's Tinkerbell. That is the rehearsals. That is a really cute picture of the cast, actually. Oh, here is one. So this, it's really, I dislike this picture. Okay, I dislike this picture quite a lot. It is a sketch of the costume design. The problem I have is that it makes Peter look about 70 years old and really creepy. And while we're talking about dark versions, he does not look like this in the actual show. I will show you him in the show in a minute, but this is the sketch design. Can you see why I'm saying what I'm saying? He looks decrepit, and I dislike that a lot. But it is still a very good sketch of the costume. So let's talk about it then. Let's talk about the costume that Peter wears in Wendy and Peter Pan. The thing with this production is that the title gives it all away. Wendy and Peter Pan. Peter is almost an afterthought in his own story, except it's not his own story. In this, Wendy is the protagonist, and it kind of shows in his costume, unfortunately. It's very minimal. He looks like it wasn't really thought about a great deal, or maybe that's how it's meant to look. He blends in with all of the other lost boys. He's wearing pretty much exactly the same thing. The only thing that separates him is that his clothes are a slightly lighter shade. Maybe this is some sort of hint towards death coming on a white horse, that kind of thing, because it is, looking at Peter and the dark aspects of his character and things like this, so maybe? But let's get into the costume itself then. So, what is Peter wearing? Well, as I said, it definitely looks like he's been given a back seat, especially when you compare it to a lot of the other costumes that are very luscious and colourful and detailed with embroideries and layers and things. This is so minimal. He's wearing a white sort of vesty shirt. He's got pale baggy-ish trousers, he's got suspenders going over his shoulders, he's got some boots on, and a little belt with a pouch and somewhat spiky, floofy hair with a bit of a twiddle in it. That hair is pretty much the same as every other member of the Lost Boys gang has, so that doesn't make him stand out at all. The outfit is exactly the same, everyone else is wearing it. It's definitely giving that sort of uniform look, which does fit for the Lost Boys gang, but Peter always notoriously wanted to look and dress differently to them. So it's kind of sad to see him renegated to the background. Even though his clothes are a slightly different shade, he is still in the lineup, just one of them. One of the things that really hits me about this costume every time I look at it is this feeling that if the actors had not needed harnesses to be able to fly, I don't know whether they would have given Peter those shoulder braces at all, and then it would have been an even more minimal costume. Now, they have, to their credit, jazzed them up a little bit with some trinkets and bits and pieces dangling off them, but I can't tell if that's because they had to have them or if they were planning to have them all along, and that's a little bit of a disappointing situation to find myself in. I think that this costume does do its job in terms of the show that it is in. It definitely gives the impression that Peter is a background character and he doesn't stand out too much, especially in comparison to Wendy, who is our main focus. Even Tinkerbell stands out more than Peter. She looks fantastic, but Peter just disappears into the background. So while I can see why they made this decision, and it definitely works for the tone and the direction they're taking this show, in terms of talking about it as a Peter Pan costume, I can't rank it very highly at all, and that's because of what it reminds me of. Now, you could be generous and say that some of the colours remind you just a little bit of the stage show, so the Nina costumes from way back in the early days and the Jean Forbes Robertson ones, the colours of autumnalness, because you do have bits of that brown in, well, mostly the Lost Boys, but it is a little bit in Peter's as well. But predominantly and unfortunately, this costume reminds me mostly of the movie Pan. So on the one hand, we've got a Peter who's wearing a vest and braces and baggy trousers and boots, and on the other hand we've got the same. It's a really disappointing way of seeing this character because he has so much to him, and to strip him back of all of that, not just in personality as particularly they did in the movie Pan, but also visually as well, it's genuinely really disappointing. I feel very strongly about Wendy and Peter Pan that while I don't quite like a lot of the changes in the directions they made, I can understand the tone of the show and what they were trying to do, but I think the outcome could have been the same if you'd given Peter a more interesting standout costume. But let's move on to the next one. What is number 4? Peter and the Star Catcher. For this one, I'm going to be talking about the Broadway stage production. This is because I can find the most images of this one, and also we can't talk about the book because he doesn't really have a costume in the book, so we're just talking about the stage show. I put this one at number 4, but only just. It does explore some similar themes to Wendy and Peter Pan, and so it's only just above it for me. The thing that pushed this one slightly above number 5 for me is that I think that compared to Wendy and Peter Pan, this one has a slightly darker theme running through it, which is that you cannot trust any of the grown-ups around you, the people who are meant to keep you safe and protect you and look after you, or just do the things that you expect or hope that they will do. And that grief and loss and death and being an orphan, all of that stuff is also very, very dark, and betrayal and things like this, and, you know, kidnapping. But that idea, that solidified idea of I can't trust you and I'm vulnerable, that to me is more dark than Wendy and Peter Pan was. So that's why this one's number 4. But let's look at Peter's costume then. Is it any darker than Wendy and Peter Pan? No, it's not. I appreciate that during some of this show, Peter is called Boy or the Boy, but he ends up being called Peter. That is who he is. I am calling him Peter. We're talking about Peter costumes. Just forgive me, go with me, here we do. Well, in this production, he has more layers, at least.
Oh, you have layers. Oh.
Unfortunately, he does still have the very plain looking t-shirt, but it seems to have some stripes on it, which is a nice change. He also has a cardigan. The braces are back once again. We have baggy cut-off trousers and some boots. Wow, this is starting to feel really similar. Can anyone think where we've heard this before? Bing, 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 bing. Now, the stripes confused me just a little bit, but when I started watching this show, I realised that because they are working with, you know, piratey sailor people, it does make some sense. The stripes to lean into that nautical piratey theme, especially given who they are working with and who they're surrounded with, and who Peter ends up getting his name from. I think it makes sense. So it adds an extra pop of detail to the costume, and, well, it's more interesting than just a plain wife-beater vest, so I'm here for it. They don't do anything to his hair in this, unlike in Wendy and Peter Pan, which is a little disappointing, because again, it's just very plain like the rest of it. While I say the stripes gave it a pop of colour, really and truly it is a very plain costume. He also doesn't have any makeup on his face, there's nothing to make him stand out at all. Again, much like with Wendy and Peter Pan, he just fades into the background. One of the big things for me when looking at Peter costumes over the years is that if you lined up every single person who played Peter Pan in their costume, there are several of them that would stand out for brilliant reasons, but there are quite a few who unfortunately would stand out because they would look like they're not supposed to be there. Some of them, as I've said in other videos, look a bit like they should be a lost boy and not Peter. But then you have ones like this, and Wendy and Peter Pan, and the movie Pan, and the mini-series Neverland, where they just don't look like Peter or a Lost Boy or anyone. They look like they're in the wrong show. So it's really disappointing to see this yet again. And while I know it goes with the darker and different tone and the story of the show, it is still Peter Pan, the character, being shown to you in a cardigan and a t-shirt. And it's getting really boring and really old now. I am not regretting doing this series, but looking at the costumes over the years, it's very hard to see it progressing after a while. It seems like they regressed and went to something really, really dull. But maybe we can save it. Let's dive into more of this costume. Much like with Wendy and Peter Pan, I can understand their reasons for dressing him the way that they did. He is supposed to be more human and more normal, until the end of the show when he ends up changing and having to stay in the Neverland. Spoiler alert. So it does work in that sense. It does make him just fit in with anyone. He is the boy. He is just one of them until the very end of the show. And so it does work. The problem is that I'm not simply judging these costumes by how well they fit into their environment. I'm judging them because this is a character that I love and how does he look? And unfortunately, it's just not very appealing in this one. The costume is sort of grubby and dirty, which again does fit in with the tone and the vibe of the show, and that definitely is something that Peter would be. He is probably grubby and dirty all the time. He's forever having adventures and running through the Neverland and going this way and that way and all over the place, so that at least I can definitely see as being very Peter. But unfortunately, overall, this costume just does leave you wanting. It doesn't feel like Peter Pan at all, but I suppose maybe that was the point, because until the very end of the show, he's not. Let's move on then to number 3. This next one is a character and a costume and a piece of media that I get asked about a lot. I have done a bunch of TikTok videos on this. I have mentioned it a few times in various different videos here on YouTube. I will probably give it its own video at some point. I need to sit down and rewatch the whole thing. For you guys, I do this. For you. But I get asked about it a lot. I usually give you my opinion in just one word, And the fact that I've said that means that a lot of you will now know which costume we are talking about. Welcome to number 3 on the dark Peter Pan costume list, and this is, of course, the Peter Pan from the TV series Once Upon a Time. Peter appeared in Once Upon a Time from the 3rd season onwards, and yes, one day I will go back and rewatch it and do a video all about it. I feel like I'm going to be that Danny guy reacting to Has Been Hotel, just screaming at the screen all the time. You're welcome for this, guys. Maybe that'll be one of the things I do over on Twitch. Who knows? Anyway, let's discuss the darkness of Once Upon a Time. So this story is so convoluted and complicated and that I cannot possibly do the entire thing. So in brief then, some of the topics that they touch on in the story of Once Upon a Time in the plotline involving Peter Pan. A twisted version of a human Malcolm, aka Peter Pan, child slavery, abuse, mental illness, prophecies, grief, evil, death, hate, and icky things like aging up the eternal child and giving him offspring. Anyway, let's talk about the costume, shall we? People who age up Peter Pan. Oh, it's so gross. Okay, so I will admit that finally, in this list, things are getting just a little bit more interesting. And believe me, I never thought I would say that about Once Upon a Time, but here we go. This costume has way more to it. However, I will say the same thing about the Once Upon a Time costume that I said about the movie Hook's costume, and that is they made it to one note. When you're watching it on the screen, the details do not pop. You cannot see them. I didn't even know they were there until I looked at behind the scenes pictures where you can see all the different details and the layering, because on the screen they just don't show. It will continue to perplex me why, when making a costume specifically for a filmed thing, a TV series or a movie, why they do not seem to take that into consideration when designing the costume and the colours it's going to be and the textures. Because, as like in the movie Hook, here in Once Upon a Time, you can't see it. It looks like it's all one colour, but it's not. It looks like he's wearing this sort of dark, jadey, emeraldy green, and it's a bit scruffy. But it's not. I was pleasantly surprised when I went to look at the pictures of this, but it's also very unfortunate that I had to go and look up behind the scenes pictures simply to see it. But ignoring how it shows on screen, how does the costume actually look? So the tunic is dark and grubby. It's got some really cool patchwork designs and it's got wonderful stitching. There's crisscrosses going all the way up the collars, the seams, the hems, everything. It's really coolly done and it's in a nice shade of dark brown as well, which unfortunately, as I said, gets washed out on camera. But when you look close, you can see it. There's a cool sort of thick netting added down the sleeves across the chest and lower. It's a very interesting detail. It looks like something that has been added on to this outfit over the years as a part of repairing it or maybe stolen from a ship, that kind of thing. Again, unfortunately, it's lost on the screen, but the detail is still very nice. You've also got this sort of mossy texture to it in places, particularly the lining under the sleeves. It's this slightly paler green that's a bit fuzzy, and it makes it look a lot more natural, particularly with the dirt as well. And you've got these really cool sort of flapping, overlapping bits of fabric down the front too. Again, unfortunately, most of these details are lost, but they are still there, so I will give them credit for adding them, even though you can't see them. I think that this costume could have been heightened if they had drawn inspiration from the original stage costumes and had some leaves cascading over the shoulder. It would have fitted in with the design that they had, even if you made it out of moss and things like this. Just something there. There's something missing in the shoulders. It's always the shoulders in Peter Pan. If you can get those right, the rest of the costume will fall right in place. And this costume is just, it's lacking. And I think that's where. I do like the wrist cuffs. I've always said this. I like costumes that add something around Peter's wrists. I mentioned this in Peter Pan and the Pirates and a bunch of stage shows as well. Very much enjoy that. It also makes him look more like a fighter, so I really like those. And the belt as well. And all of those have a sort of leafy shape design to them in the leather, so I like that as a detail. Again, you can't really see it, but when you can, it's very nice. I also very much like the tattered sort of trousers and the long boots. I'm a big fan of Peter Pan shoes. If you can get those right, love those, and a big long patchworky boot with lace-ups, absolutely love those. Sadly, again, for the 3rd time on this list, he has nothing on his face. There is no makeup, there is nothing. His hair has nothing done to it. I'm starting to miss the Wendy and Peter Pan hair, and I never thought I'd say that. There's nothing there. It's like from the shoulders up, nothing was done. And It's very disappointing and confusing, especially when you consider how dark this show gets and what they could have done with that. If I'd had the opportunity to edit the Once Upon a Time costume, this is what I would have done. Number one, I would have burst into the writer's room and told them, absolutely not, in no way are you having an aged up Peter Pan and do not give him offspring. But, you know, after that happened and I fixed the story, I would have added dark leaves, skeleton leaves, and dark leaves going across one or both of his shoulders, either in a sort of feather-like flash or just in a streak going up one. I would have then continued this in dark, sort of almost shadow tattoos, so not completely black, but maybe a sort of shade of dark greeny grey up around his cheek. I would have done darker stuff around the eyes, added stuff to the hair, maybe stuck back a little bit with what looks like leafy, shadowy shapes through the hair, almost like he's been running and moving really fast and it's struck back a little bit. I also would have changed his eyes, either in post-production or by giving him contacts. They wouldn't have been bright mollymawk red, but I think they could have been a sort of orangey colour to hint at the sun of the Neverland, but also that he's a darker character and it could be like fire or flames or that just evil red. But hey, that's a pipe dream. The series has been and gone now and there's nothing I can do about this costume anymore. What does it remind me of then? Well, in some ways it does seem to draw inspiration from the original stage costumes. I can see a little bit of the Nina and Jean Forbes Robertson's costumes here in the shape of the tunic, the way the sleeves are layered, the different bits of netting in pieces. That I can sort of give them. But also as well the Maud Adams style of green leafy costumes. While there aren't any actual leaves in this costume, you can definitely see the green details and the patchworky bits. So I could believe them if they said that they'd looked at the Maud Adams costumes while designing it. Unfortunately though, the biggest similarity for me is to the movie Hook. And it's very unfortunate that I do not like either of these pieces of media as their portrayals of Peter Pan age him up and give him children. Their costumes ironically have a similar problem as well, which is that despite having some detail to them, it gets lost on the screen. Let's move on then to number 2. This is one that I came across a while ago and forgot about, and then got reminded of the other day on Pinterest of all places. And I don't know if I'm glad or not that I got reminded about it. I think not, but hey, it fills out the number 2 spot, so here we go. This is a little known movie called Neverland. But what makes it dark then? Why is this adaptation taking the number 2 spot? Well, some of its themes, in brief, include drug abuse, addiction, crime, sadism, kidnapping, murder, death, etc., etc., etc. Alright, let's get into it then. What does Peter Pan's costume look like? I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this one is short and sweet. It's another one that does not look like Peter at all. He looks like a guy. He has a tattoo on his neck, which is giving Shadow Hunter vibes. He occasionally has a green Night Sky velvet fedora hat. He has a green t-shirt that looks a bit like he got it from a Nike store, and occasionally a white jacket. He has no makeup really on his face. His hair isn't doing anything interesting. Seriously, why am I missing the crazy spiky floofy hair from Wendy and Peter Pan? So, yeah, genuinely, there is not a lot to say about this one. I've put it at number 2 for darkness rating, but honestly, there's not a lot else to say about it. This movie is incredibly difficult to find, incredibly difficult to watch, so, yep, good luck if you manage to find it, and I'm sorry if you do. It's a ride, it's a trip. And, yeah, character-wise, in terms of the plot, this really isn't Peter Pan. It actually, in a way, feels like it's an early version of this Nightmare Neverland that we're about to get next year, and yeah, that's going to be an interesting ride too. So, yeah, what does this costume remind me of? Well, once again, it reminds me of the movie Pan, in that it looks like just a normal guy. And in the same vein, it reminds me a little bit of Wendy and Peter Pan, although Wendy and Peter Pan, I will say, does look a bit more fantastical. This looks very much like someone who just stepped out of Primark. And of course, in the same way, it also reminds me of Peter and the Starcatcher. Again, Peter looking just like a normal person who, if you put them in a lineup, you would not know they were Peter Pan at all. Now, this does work, again, like I said with the others, it works for the tone of the movie and what they're going for. He is supposed to look like a human person, he is supposed to look like just everyone else, and it's what they do that makes the character stand out. But, once again, most of the other characters have more interesting costumes. The mermaids, Wendy even, the Captain Hook style character, the Tinkerbell character, they all just look more visually interesting, and Peter is left looking just kind of dull and boring. So, again, it may be number 2 because of its darkness rating, but the costume itself is, yeah, very lacking. But let's move on then to number 1. What could possibly be my most dark reimagining of the story of Peter Pan for this list? Grim Fairy Tales Neverland. Now, I forgot that I had this for a really long time. I bought it many years ago on accident because I saw the front cover and thought, oh, that's a Peter Pan thing. I'm interested, let me buy it. And then I read it. To give you an idea of what kind of thing you're in for, and YouTube, well, it's a good job I'm not monetizing this video because YouTube would probably not let me. This is the kind of art style that I was greeted with the moment I opened it. So, kind of tells you everything you need to know about how this series treats its female characters. Yeah, that was uncomfortable and icky, but I read the story. What makes Grim Fairy Tales Neverland graphic novel the darkest of the ones on this list so far? Predominantly, I will admit, most of it is how they treat their female characters. That just gives you an uneasy sense from start to finish. It feels very, very icky. It feels like they are merely there as, you know, objects, and they are treated that way by certain characters in the story as well, but also, of course, by, you know, the illustrators too. And while, yep, this is a style and it's a design choice and whatever, I completely understand that, absolutely. It does still, nonetheless, give you that feeling of like, oh, okay. But there are other dark themes in it as well, so ignoring that massive elephant in the room for a second, what's the story like? Well, as to be expected, the idea of power and imbalance and SA is a big thing through this. You've also got kidnapping, murder, torture, imprisonment, abuse of many different kinds, and yeah, just that general sense of ickiness. It is also just dark in tone. Visually, a lot of the artwork is darker, while some of the costumes pop and the bits of the Neverland have more colour, it is still darker and grittier. Think, you know, Batman versus Marvel, that kind of thing. But what about this version of Peter Pan's costume then? It's annoyingly cool. Peter's illustration design on the cover is pretty much why I picked this up many, many years ago. It's annoyingly cool. It's not the best I've ever seen, but it's annoyingly cool. It reminds me quite a lot of Peter Pan and the Pirates, and I like it for a lot of the same reasons. One of the big things in this is that Peter has long hair in a ponytail. I've always liked this as a vibe. He's very otherworldly, and it gives a very fey, elvish look to him. He also has pointed ears as well, which definitely adds to that. In this, though, his hair is silver. It takes sort of Tolkienish elves and elevates them again, making him look just other. There's definitely something uncanny about him all the way through this, which is intentional, of course. He also has red-ish eyes, and they're always sort of narrowed and dark, and he's got a big scar down his face as well. And while having a scar down your face is, well, think of Disney, it's very classic, ooh, that's a villain, it also still does pull it all together. The scar, the long, unearthly hair, the fey-like ears, the red eyes. He looks unsettling, and he's meant to. I do wish they'd done more with the makeup around his face though, but of course in animation and graphic novels it is more difficult to keep consistent, so I'll give them a break there, but I wish they'd added just a touch more around his eyes. He is of course aged up once again in this, which I am never going to be okay with, and it is done for very, very icky reasons, but the costume he wears does still look really, really interesting. It is loads of different shades of dark, earthy brown. It's got pops of black through it too. He is a villain. It's got bits of silver as well. I love the fact that he's got sort of armor plates over his shoulders and on his wrists. Again, leaning into that, he can fight and he's a fighter, but also he's got power and protection there too. That's really interesting. And it goes with his hair as well, keeping the color palette consistent. The tunic I like as well. It's got different textures and shades of this dark, earthy, rich, reddy brown with lighter notes and darker notes, and again all that black going through it. I like the way you've got the different cuts of the pattern and it gets darker going down the sides as well. I also really like the style of boots they've gone for. They look almost as if they're tied to his legs and they're made of sort of leafy bits of fabric and stuff, and very pointy and fey-like too. I like that they thought about practicality when designing this. You can see where he keeps all of his weapons, how easy it is for him to move, jump, fly, be so fast all the time, and they kept the colour palette consistent too. The silver hair, the red of the eyes, the browns, the muted blacks and different colours, and the silver popping through. He even has a touch of his attachment to Tinkerbell in his costume. He has a sort of gold and red attachment here, a sort of not quite a necklace, but an attachment sort of around the front, and it's in exactly the same colour and design as the little headpiece that Tinkerbell wears. And in this story, she is very, well, sort of literally and metaphorically attached to him, and there's that power imbalance between them. And the fact that everything else about him is silver, brown, and black, but this is gold and red, and it's the only link between him and the character of Tinkerbell that shows you immediately the power imbalance between them and the fact that they are connected. A very good costume and design choice there. It's all been thought about as a cohesive costume that fits together, and while I do not like the source material story very much, the costume itself I really enjoy. Visually, it looks brilliant, and I do think that if you put this Peter in a lineup with all of the other ones, he would fit. He looks different, sure, but he would still fit. So what does this costume remind me of then, looking back at all the other costumes over 120 years of Peter Pan? Well, one of the first things it did was take me all the way back to the original stage designs with Nina and Jean Forbes Robertson and those muted, earthy colours with the reds and the two-tone tunics, the browns and all of this, that's definitely showing through here. And while it doesn't have the leafy details, they do still give him pieces on his shoulders, which harkens again back to those older costumes which had the leaves cascading over the edges. The biggest comparison I can make though is to Peter Pan and the Pirates. Very similar design in the browns and the tunics and the darker colours, the hair being pulled back into a ponytail. That is definitely a comparison that I make, and it's a very good one. Despite their lore being very different, the thing that they have achieved making Peter look unearthly and fae-like and all brown and autumnal, that's a very similar vibe, and I really enjoy it. Another costume that I would compare this one to is from the movie of Finding Neverland. That one again drew lots of inspiration from the original stage costumes, but made it a bit different. It had the gold cascading leaves, and gold is a colour you can see here with Peter's connection to Tinkerbell, and the darker, reddier colour that Finding Neverland had for their tunic, you can also see here in the darker panels of black and red and brown. And also, in a way, the Finding Neverland stage makeup Peter had that twirled around his eyes, that gives him that eerie, unearthly look, that's definitely something you can see in this Peter here. Altogether then, the Grimm Fairy Tales Neverland is number one for the darkness of its story, but also if I had to pick, this one would be my favourite of all the dark adaptation costumes as well. I appreciate it's not really a very fair fight because this one is basically only fighting Once Upon a Time, because the other three costumes, well, it's a bit generous to call them costumes really, as they all just look like a guy. But looking at this one again, the Neverland costume, while I really dislike the plot and everything they've done with it, the costume itself, what does it achieve? Does it make Peter look dark and eerie? Yes. Does it make him look unearthly and fae-like? Yes. Does it make him look interesting and appealing? Yes. Is it a costume that I would want to make? Yes. But also no, simply because of where it's from. But in terms of as a costumer, yes, I would want to make this. And also, just does it look like Peter Pan? Yes. And this is because it has everything. Where even Once Upon a Time fell flat, despite all the beautiful detailing that they had, everything from the shoulders up was just plain and there was nothing there. But this costume, every inch, there's something very Peter-like about it. From the fae-like ears and the hair to the darkened red eyes and the scar, the shoulder pieces, everything is thought of. And so, yeah, this one is my favourite of all the dark adaptations. Which one was your favourite though? Let me know in the comments down below, and have I missed any dark adaptations you'd like me to talk about? Let me know those in the comments down below as well. Although, in my defence, 5 is a really good round number to use. Let me know what else you think in the comments down below. If there's anything else you'd like to hear me talk about, chuck that in the comments as well. And don't forget to hop on over to the Peter Pan Lore and Peter Pan Facts TikTok page, where I do videos every single day and I answer all of you guys' questions. Alright, thanks for joining in with this episode of the 120 Years of Peter Pan series. What is coming next though for November? Well, this series is coming to an end. It will be finishing at the very end of December, celebrating on the same day that the first production of Peter Pan ever was put on the stage. For November, we're going to be coming right up close to the present day and covering productions from the early 2000s to about 2020. From then in December, I'll be talking about the most recent productions. So hopefully I will see you in those videos. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and thank you for watching. Be good to yourselves and don't forget to hydrate. Bye bye.